So recently I've been going through the Jak and Daxter series, and I finally got to the final game in that series, Jak and Daxter: The Lost Frontier. I played a handful of the Jak games, most notably being the original trilogy. However, I always knew that this game was on the way. I've spoken to other people and they have told me that Lost Frontier is the worst game in the series, but I wasn't truly sure until I tried it out myself, and unfortunately, they were right.
You're one of them.
Let's just dive into the gameplay for Lost Frontier. It's apparent that the team tried to mimic the gameplay from Jak 2 and 3, but adding in some different things to spice it up a bit. Honestly, I think the ideas are really good, but the execution was just bad. Maybe because this was a smaller game in terms of scale, but I think if this game had the proper budget and production behind it, then it could have been on the level of the original trilogy. Instead, it ended up being lackluster. So let's look at this on a smaller level. You still play in a third-person perspective as Jak with Daxter on his shoulder, which is nice, and when running into enemies you can still perform the usual melee attacks. The punches and kicks are about the same as before, but again, it just didn't feel as fast or fluid as before. It was a bit more jank. Finding an opening to attack the enemy with these punches and kicks isn't hard, but actually executing them just didn't feel as it did before. Moving on to the guns, I liked how it was tied to the different types of eco like in the other games. Then the team took it a step further and added special abilities for the different ecos themselves. So for example, using the yellow eco would allow you to jump up real high while trying to reach certain obstacles. It's obvious when to use these powers based on the given situation because none of the other powers will work in order for you to actually progress. Figuring out which powers to use depending on the situation was a nice way to get you to actually think about what you're doing during the combat instead of just spamming everything in your arsenal. Using the powers to actually kill the enemies wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. I'm not sure if it was because they weren't that effective, but they didn't seem like a viable option when fighting enemies and bosses. I gravitated more towards using the normal shots of the guns instead. I think if the powers were geared a bit more towards combat and not as much exploration and traversal, then they would have been more effective. It's like they were created for the sole fact of adding more to the guns, but they weren't a viable option in a lot of the combat situations. In its entirety, the combat itself isn't that bad. It's fun enough to where you should enjoy it if you played a Jak game before, but you can tell changes have been made. It's still satisfying to kill the enemies and shoot them with the guns, but how everything feels just doesn't match. I know I'm not giving a concrete reason as to what makes it feel so different, but this is one of those situations where you just have to try the game out for yourself to actually understand. The platforming is one area of Jak that has always been pretty good, but in this game it was bad. I think it was more due to the overall movement and less to the platforming itself. Moving Jak felt slow and jank, even when not really doing anything. Just running from place to place, he does this sort of run that doesn't feel right. So when I finally started platforming, you can imagine how that was. It's like I was playing Frogger and had to slowly hop on each ledge and platform instead of jumping fluidly. I couldn't tell you the amount of times I would miss jumps because the jumping itself was so weird to execute. I missed plenty of ledges and hard to reach places simply because the movement was so bad. Thankfully there wasn't a lot of situations where enemies were placed in locations where you had to platform to, so you didn't have to worry about killing them while trying to jump up somewhere. It's interesting because it's clear the team tried replicating the platforming because you'll get through sections where you're jumping on poles and going across gaps that are all too familiar from the older games. It's just the execution itself was flawed. A new feature that was added in this game that didn't exist in the others was the ability to fly ships. And no, I don't mean flying cars throughout a city, I mean you would literally fly ships across giant areas. On paper this sounds really cool, flying throughout new areas, exploring and finding new locations to check out. Then you add on the aerial combat and this should have all worked perfectly, right? Wrong. Just like everything else, it feels jank. Flying the ship on its own was okay, as everything is calm and you can enjoy the scenery, but when fighting other ships, it doesn't mesh as well as it should. There's plenty of battles where you have to kill a certain amount of ships or another ship over multiple stages. They have a health bar that would decrease slowly as you did damage, normal stuff, but it was way too easy for you to get shot, even with the ability to boost and do barrel rolls to try and avoid damage. One cool mechanic was how you could shoot Daxter out of your ship and have him break down the rival ship for parts that you could use to improve your own ship. This could be regarding ship health or weapons, but all of it was useful. What I liked the most about the ships was the entire customization system. Back in the sort of home base for each area, you had your fleet of ships that you could customize in a variety of ways. First off, you had to choose a ship. Then you could improve different aspects like armor and weapons by adding mods to the ship. Doing this would help boost your ship in crucial areas and was such a big difference during the aerial combat. In my opinion, this is the one area that you can absolutely not forget about. If you don't upgrade your ships, you literally won't be able to finish the game. The airship sections are way too difficult to get through even with the upgrades. You have to continue upgrading and adding mods or you'll be in for a tough time. Now let's move on to the weirdest mechanic of the game, Dark Daxter. or Tasmanian Daxter. I don't even know what to call this. I don't know whose idea it was to have Daxter react to Dark Eco like this, but it didn't match at all. The whole point of Daxter being an Ottsel was because he fell in a pool of Dark Eco. Beyond that, he shouldn't have any other effects that stem from Dark Eco. It makes no sense. Nevertheless, Daxter can now turn into this giant Tasmanian devil-like creature and cause havoc during certain segments. It's weird that he is limited to these certain segments and he never used these powers during the normal gameplay. In the other Jak games, the Daxter sections were always incorporated into the gameplay loop really well. This time around, it felt so segmented and rigid from before, like more of a mini game instead of part of the main mission. To make things worse, the gameplay itself wasn't really fun. You just turned into a tornado and blew through obstacles while hitting some enemies in your normal form. I don't know why this was even included in the game or the thought process behind it. Maybe the devs wanted to add something unique for Daxter, but this wasn't it. Every time one of these sections came up, I was just like, oh brother, here we go again. When it comes to the locations, I was a bit torn on this. I liked how there was a lot of them and you were able to venture onto the ships to explore what was on them. Then after flying to another area, the mission would take place in that particular location, sort of like Jak 2 and 3. However, these areas weren't really all that impressive. I liked the design, but they felt more like random areas with different environments. There was no reason for me to actually care about the location itself. Like in the previous game, the areas you would fight in held some sort of value. Like in Jak 2, when you completed missions in the outskirts of town, on the surface it looked like nothing but rubble, but when you realize it's actually Sandover Village from Jak 1, it makes that place have a whole lot more meaning. In Lost Frontier, that was never the case. You do visit the area where Jak was experimented on, and you see a cutscene with a flashback of that, but from what I remember, that's it. I think the locations were just a little weak in general. The biggest thing that I liked from the gameplay was the overall ideas from Jak's portion. Everything from the original games is there. The ideas were done really well, and I think what the team was trying to put together could have served as the evolution that this gameplay needed. However, the execution was off, and the gameplay ended up feeling off from what we got in the past. I think if this game had more time in the oven and a larger budget, it could have rivaled the original trilogy for sure. In regards to the story, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't care at all. Right from the start with the whole mining eco from Rock's setup, it just didn't work for me. Then as the plot unraveled and you started meeting new characters, I still didn't care. None of the characters were interesting and held my attention. Even in the older games where we were introduced to new characters without any build up, they would leave some sort of impression or memory on me. In this game, that was never the case. I was just like, oh okay, another NPC, even though they might have been important to the story. If someone was talking other than Jak, Daxter, or Kira, then it was whatever. Now maybe this game's story is meant to be sort of a side journey, but there were so many characters missing in it, it was insane. By the time we left off in Jak X, we had a whole cast of characters, plenty of side people to choose from, but instead, none of them even appear in this game. And to say that it hurt the story was an understatement. For a longtime fan like myself, I was stunned by how little I cared, and I'm easily impressed. As the game went on and more was revealed, even with the plot twist later on, none of it had any weight. There was no emotional connection, no real stakes. I always felt like everything was going to be okay by the end, at least for our trio of main characters. Personally, I'm not a fan of the pirate aesthetic in general, so maybe that's why I didn't really vibe with this game's story. The villain is just underwhelming, and so many times I found myself saying, bro, what are we doing? In its entirety, this story is completely skippable, and I have no reason to ever care or remember anything that happened here. Overall, Jak and Daxter The Lost Frontier is a bad game. It doesn't feel like Jak and Daxter. To be fair, there are some good ideas that the team had in this game, especially regarding the combat. I think if these were fleshed out a bit more, then we really could have gotten a good game. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Add on a forgettable story and you've got the makings for a trash game. And unfortunately, that's what this was. For those reasons, I'm gonna give this game a 5. This isn't the worst game I've ever played, but it's bad. And for it to be a Jak and Daxter game, it hurts even more. I think you should only play this if you're a hardcore Jak fan like me. If you enjoyed the OG trilogy but never played this, I wouldn't recommend it. Having this be the last game in the franchise hurts, as I think this series ended in a bad way. The only hope for this series now would be a remake of one of the trilogy games or a Jak 4, but with current Naughty Dog, I don't think that would ever happen. But it is what it is, I guess. What did you think about Jak and Daxter The Lost Frontier? Have you played this before, or are you hearing about this for the first time? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to watch one of my other reviews right here.